Let's continue our series through Exodus called The Biblical Moses That Hollywood Forgot. Let's talk about where we were last week previously in Exodus, the biblical Moses that Hollywood forgot. We saw the gods of Egypt turned upside down, decimated by the one true God, the one and only unique, incomparable God. All of these are literally paper pretenders. The only reason we remember these Egyptian gods today is that they make the Egyptians drew pretty hieroglyphics. We talked about the Passover and what happened with Pharaoh arising in the night, he and his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt. How come? For no home. There was no home where there was not someone dead. Firstborn of Egypt, not the firstborn of Israel. How come? Because they took the blood of a perfect, unblemished lamb that they had watched for 4 days to make sure it really was without blemish and imperfection. They sacrificed that lamb, they painted the doorposts and the lintel of the home, and when the angel of death came to destroy the firstborn of all Egypt, he saw the blood on their door and he passed over them. Who is the most thrilled person in the entire geographic land of Egypt on that night? The firstborn of the Jews. If you were a firstborn male in your home, you literally were passed over. But not so much for the Egyptians. Pharaoh, who lost his own firstborn, calls for Moses and Aaron at night. Doesn't wait till the sun rises. Before the sun rises, he says, rise up, get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go worship the Lord as you have said. Rise up, get out, go. And then verse 32, take 4 imperatives, which put together mean get out now. Don't wait. I'm driving you out. Take your flocks, your herds, as you've said, go, bless me also. Moses, Aaron, the Hebrew people, they gain everything they'd asked for and more. All they had asked for was just a period of time to worship. Pharaoh gave them that, and an indefinite leave. You may go and don't come back. We're done with you. No more Hebrews in the land. Now, the time that the sons of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. And at the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the hosts of the Lord, the armies of the Lord, the Israelites the Hebrews are pictured as the armies of God, the armies of Jehovah, the armies of Adonai, went out from the land of Egypt. It is a night to be observed for the Lord, not for the Jews, for the Lord. So if you're an Israelite and you're observing it, it's not because of you or your health. You're observing it. It's for obedience to the Lord. That's Thanksgiving. It's the truest Thanksgiving that the world has ever seen, with the exception of one other event, the death and burial and resurrection of our Messiah. This is the Exodus, the Passover. It's the greatest act of redemption that the world had ever seen to that moment. And it retains its record for 1,500 years until the time of Yeshua's death. But it is a night to be observed for the Lord, for having brought them out from the land of Egypt. It is an event. It is a ritual meal that is to be observed in remembrance of a historical event. It is not for primarily the purpose of a theological proclamation. It is not primarily for the purpose of cultural propagation. It is a night to remember what God did. Don't forget. Keep this evening in your national consciousness. Because this night is for the Lord. And it is to be observed by all the sons of Israel throughout their generations. And so today, we celebrate Passover. It's a 3,500-year-old celebration. And when we, as believers in Yeshua, participate in communion, we are also participating in the Passover. Because communion, the death, burial, and resurrection, is the ultimate fulfillment. There is a direct line that takes us from the Passover to the death, burial, and resurrection of our Messiah. And the Beth Sar, it is an act that is placed solidly by Yeshua himself on the foundation of the redemption of Israel in the Passover. So why do we dwell on these passages? Because they are particularly meaningful and relevant for all who follow Yeshua, Jewish or Gentile believers. 3,500 years later, we're still doing this. And now we get to a section which is, you've just had the Passover, you talked about the Jewish people leaving, and the narrative now stops again. I, as a young reader, always wanted to get to the Red Sea. It's my favorite part, right? I mean, you want to see the crossing of the Red Sea, and you're stuck in a traffic jam, a literary traffic jam, talking about laws and rules and regulations. What's the issue? Because God didn't redeem Israel and the firstborn sons of all Israel for his health. There's a purpose. And the purpose of his actions is to propagate faith and obedience in his people. And so it is not enough to just believe. If belief was all that was necessary, then you would have a very short New Testament. It would end with the Gospels. And that's as far as we'd ever get. We wouldn't need any letters. We wouldn't need epistles. We wouldn't need anything else. No instruction whatsoever. Because faith is not the end game for God. The end game for God is there is no end game. And that requires relationship between his people and himself. And in order for God and imperfect humanity to be in relationship with one another, the people must be obedient to his instructions. So belief must be seen, must be exercised through obedience. Please do not misunderstand me. Obedience saves no one. But we see faith through obedience. Faith that never is exercised in obedience is flabby faith, right? So if you want to have a girly man faith, then you're never going to progress. You'll always be girly man, right? But if you want a big, strong, muscular faith, then you must exercise that faith with obedience. And so that is why we have chapter 13, this whole section about the redemption of the firstborn. And that's a good section too, because we've just seen the redemption of Israel, and literally, again, the most happy people in all Israel are the firstborn of Israel. So it's a natural subject to take to the next section here before we continue with the narrative. So this is truly the pause that refreshes. Let's see what this passage is all about, shall we? Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Sanctify to me every firstborn, the first offspring of every womb among the sons of Israel, both of man and beast. It belongs to me." So in view of the supernatural liberation that we have just discussed in the previous chapter, at this point, laws are enumerated concerning the consecration of the firstborn, the separation, the sanctification, same word. Consecration, separation, sanctification, same word. Consecration of the firstborn of Israel to the Lord. They must be set apart. Both the firstborn son of the Hebrews and the firstborn males of their animals personally belong to God. The nation of Israel as a whole is considered by the Lord to be his firstborn. Exodus 4:22. Then thus you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. You remember that our Messiah, Jesus himself, was presented at the temple in accordance with this particular law that is about to unfold, the first portion of chapter 13, where when the days for their purification according to the law of Moses were completed, they brought him up. Who's him? Yeshua, baby Yeshua, up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. This 31st day of life, as it was written in the law of the Lord. And we've just seen it. Every firstborn male that opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. So the outplay of this law that we're about to look at in Exodus 13 plays out very clearly in the post-Christmas story that we're very familiar with in Luke. This is just a preamble of why they're in the temple, and Simeon sees them, and Anna sees the man, and Simeon says, "My eyes have seen the salvation of the." You know this passage is very familiar, but the origin of this passage is in this section, right? And it gives an opportunity as we read about this, the consecration, the separation, the sanctification of the firstborn. All of us, whether we're physically firstborn or not, under the new covenant, all of us have been set apart, consecrated, sanctified to the Messiah. And let's go even beyond that. Everyone in the world who has ever lived lives their life in consecration, in separation, in sanctification to something or someone. I'm sure that there are people in this room who know people, and maybe you yourselves were at some point in your life one of those people, who are sanctified, set apart, consecrated to sports. And they would no sooner miss a Sunday afternoon game than miss a meal. They are going to be in the same place at the same time, in front of the same screen, with the same snacks. They're consecrated. It's like their own little church service, right? And if you ever go to a stadium, and I know people aren't going to stadiums anymore, they're half empty, but nonetheless, people do still go to stadiums, and you watch them, if you're part of them, it is the biggest church service of them all. Right? It's the biggest church service with emotional outbursts and physical and emotional and mental declarations of triumph and defeat. And if you turn the volume down on an exciting Cowboys game. You watch the audience, turn the volume down, put on some praise and worship music. It looks like you're in a Pentecostal revival. Right? Some of us are consecrated, set apart to work, to our jobs, our whole identities. Now, nobody in this room, man, talking to some of you watching on the screen, people out there somewhere, but nobody. But some of us are consecrated to our jobs. And our identities are defined by what we do. So who we are is what we do. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a teacher, I'm a dentist, I'm a this, I'm a that. Right? Some of us, well, you can think, I don't want to spend too much time on this. You can fill in the blanks and think about the people in your life, think about your own life. And I want you to really think about if somebody was watching you, which by the way, someone always is, the Lord. And failing that, he's watching you he's the best security camera of all. He's always watching you. He's always on the job, 24/7. But you know who else is watching you? Your family's watching you. Your children are watching you. Your spouse is watching you. Your parents are watching you. Your neighbors are watching you. It's enough to make somebody paranoid. But our eyes are on you all the time. No man is an island, said John Donne, and he's right. If it's not John Donne, don't correct me publicly, it'll embarrass me. But no man is an island unto himself. We live and then we move in community. And people watch what we do, not just what we say, but they watch what we do. When you're a parent, that lesson is learned. If you hadn't learned a lesson by the time you're a parent, it really comes home when you tell your children and the child catches you doing something that you told the child not to do, right? Because eyes are always on you. And so since eyes are always on you, but particularly the eyes that really count, the eyes of the Lord, He knows what you have been set apart for, what you've been consecrated for, and He's looking to see if what He's done for you jibes with the reality of how you live your life. So this is a really good passage to remind us of that. It's not just ancient, archaic Israelite law. It's really a window into human nature and our relationship with God. So, let's see. Moses said to the people, "Remember this day in which you went out from Egypt, from the house of slavery." By the way, he's about to make a word play. So here you have avadim, the slavery. "For by a powerful hand the Lord brought you out from this place. Nothing leavened shall be eaten." Wait a minute. I thought we were talking about the consecration, the separation, the sanctification of the firstborn. Why are we interspersing the Feast of Matzah, unleavened bread, with the consecration of the firstborn? Because the whole point of the consecration of the firstborn is because of what happened on the night of Passover. You are never going to repeat what you did on that Passover in sacrificing a lamb and painting your doorposts and lintel. That is never to be repeated. So how are the Jewish people commanded, therefore, from that point on, to commemorate that great redemption of the firstborn of Egypt, of Israel, and the freedom of the Hebrews? They are to observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You think the Jewish people keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread because we're that attached to matzah? We're not. News for you. Matzah doesn't taste so good. And I don't care if you're putting peanut butter and jelly on it. I don't care what you're doing. It's still matzah. It's only flour and water. So we only do it because God commands that this is the way to remember, right? By a powerful hand, the Lord brought you out from this place. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, even more so than Passover, okay? And now, of course, the two names are conjoined. Two holidays are conjoined into one in people's thought. But this is the greatest holiday the Jewish people had ever seen. This is the Independence. It's literally Independence Day. You were slaves. So this is like 4th of July, Christmas, your birthday, and everything else, and Veterans Day because you were all slaves, all rolled into one. So it should be something to remember, and not just remember it. Yeah, I give intellectual assent. I remember the story. No. You act, right? And you act by observing the Feast of Unleavened Bread. On this day, in the month of Aviv, you are about to go forth. It shall be that when the Lord brings you to the land of the Canaanite, the Hivite, the Amorite, the Hivite, the Jebusite, the Kryptonite, the Satellite, the Mosquitobite, which he swore to, that never gets old for me, maybe for you, but I love it, which he swore to your fathers to give you. When did he swear to your fathers? Who were their fathers? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We talked about them earlier this morning. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob swore to your fathers. This is the Abrahamic covenant. So when the Lord fulfills the promise of bringing you back out of this land that you're going to be in for 4 centuries and brings you back to the land that he's promised, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, with absolute incredible fertility and fecundity and wonderful fertile land, that you shall observe avodah. So this rite in this month. So there is a way of remembering the slavery and the observance. Watch this again. I'll show you how it worked. The slavery, avadim, to avodah. So when you read the passage, not broken up with me like I'm doing with explanation, but when you're actually just reading a couple of verses, you get the avodim, avodah. It sticks in your head. Mama say, never. But you shall observe this rite in this month. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the 7th day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten throughout the 7 days. It's not all that you can eat, but that is what they must eat during this week, as opposed to leavened bread, leavened product. Unleavened bread shall be eaten throughout the 7 days. Nothing leavened shall be seen among you, nor shall any leaven be seen among you in all your borders. Leaven, remember, a symbol of sin. You're purifying yourselves. You're purifying your domicile. So you're purifying your body. It's literally a symbolic cleanse. I know cleansing is very popular in certain populations and certain cultures in our country. And people always put, hey, do this cleanse, do that cleanse, to which I say, yich, but nothing doing. But this is a symbolic cleanse. You're cleansing your body from any leaven, symbolic sin. And of course, because no leaven is to be found in your property or in your territory or in your society, then you have a society that is symbolically, at least for a short period of time, 7 days, that is free from symbolic sin. So the story must be passed down from generation to generation. You shall tell your son on that day, whether or not your son asks. Right? And I have to admit that in 21 years, I don't think my son has ever actually articulated, Dad, why is this night different from all other nights? Not on his own anyway. He never asked me, how come we're doing this, right? So whether the kid asks you or not, you tell him. You shall tell your son on that day, saying, it's because of what the Lord did for me. And by consequence, you as well, because there is no you if there was no me. What the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt, to which your son would say, if he's a wise guy like mine, but we didn't come out from Egypt, you came from Brooklyn. And the idea is that in this one act. All the Jewish people of all time were redeemed by God because all of us were ultimately in the loins of our ancestors. So we were all somehow present, even though it's 3,500 years later. And it shall serve as a sign to you on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead. This should sound familiar, right? We read this kind of language in the Ve'ahavta every day, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth, for with a powerful hand the Lord brought you out of Egypt. And it is here from this passage, along with the passage that we read from Deuteronomy 6 and the Ve'ahavta, from this, a literal interpretation of this passage is the origin of the ancient practice of wearing tefillin. Now, I would read this passage, me as a student of the Bible, I would have said this is symbolic language. It is like a sign on your head. It is like a sign on your hand, on your arm. But nonetheless, ancient Jews took this very literally, and they created little leather pouches that are ritually bound. You can see the stripes around the man's forearm, and you see he's wearing a box literally between his eyes on his forehead. These have been ritually bound on the foreheads and the arms of the observant Jewish men since biblical times. And so we look here, you see a good cross picture of what that box looks like on a young man's forehead. And then we see what the components are, these straps and the boxes and little tiny parchments. By the way, the boxes contain small parchment scroll, very, very small writing, tiny writing, and 4 passages are written in this order: Deuteronomy 11, Deuteronomy 6, the Ve'ahavta, Exodus 13, what we're reading now, okay, and Exodus 13, 1 through 10, and then Exodus 13, 11 through 16. The end of Exodus 13 comes before. Why? I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure there's a reason. But nonetheless, those 4 passages are inside these tiny boxes. You can see again, this is another picture of what these little scrolls look like in these pouches, in these boxes. Another picture of the straps wound around the arm. Now, Jesus, Yeshua, condemned not the practice of wearing phylacteries or tefillin. He condemned the ostentatious proportion of some of his contemporaries' phylacteries or tefillin. Matthew 23. They do all their deeds to be noticed by men. They broaden their phylacteries. So you saw those straps. They were fairly narrow straps, right? And so you'd have super thick straps. Look at me, right? And so you're wound up. Some people would be wound up like Wonder Woman's bracelets with these thick tassels, thick straps, and lengthen the tassels on their garment. But Jesus, Yeshua, left no other record of his opinion of this very common practice of wearing the tefillin. That's all we know, just not to be ostentatious about it. But the emphasis of the passage at hand in Exodus, is that God's Torah, God's law, is to be continually remembered throughout the day. So phylacteries, tefillin, can be a tool to that end. You start your morning with prayer, not a bad practice. And the way you prepare your body for a time of prayer is to lay tefillin and to put on, in a sense, speaking of veterans, put on your special prayer uniform to begin your day. Not a bad practice. No, I don't condemn it, and Jesus himself did not condemn the practice. But nonetheless, it's a good lesson for us. Because when you think about the conversations that go on in people's at lunch or at dinner or through the day at work, it is rare that the average conversation, if you were to eavesdrop at the table next to you, let's just assume that the people next to you, you knew for sure they were believers. If you eavesdropped at any point in anyone's conversation, if you're any believer's conversation, I think it's really rare to land upon a conversation in which God's law or God's word or God's instruction or theological concepts or ideas, biblical ideas, are actually being discussed. Right? Again, going back to sports, you hear a lot about stats. You hear about a lot of, this team's chances during draft time. You hear a lot about, draft picks, and you may hear about complaints about work. You may hear about the latest movie, or you may hear about the latest water cooler TV show. And weren't you surprised when this person turned out to be that person, or whoever, whatever? You hear this kind of chat, this kind of discussion. It is a rarity, sadly, to our shame, I think, that we do not have God's law, God's words, God's instructions in our conversational carpet bag. It just doesn't happen all that often, and it's too bad. We're all guilty of that. We all can do better in that. So, it would be nice, like today, perhaps, when you go to lunch, for those of you, by the way, who are not in our new members class, we'll be staying here and we're eating lunch together, and we'll indeed be talking about these things. But for everybody else, when you go to lunch today, wouldn't it be nice to think that at least half of you are discussing some of the things that you learned today during the message or during the Torah, or something that struck you in worship, or a particular idea that has to do with God or His directions, whatever the case may be. Bring God into your conversations, not just in a perfunctory way to make sure you say thanks before the food, right? Because anybody can bow their head and close their eyes, okay, for 30 seconds. We all can do that. That's easy, right? I do that every night. I bow my head, close my eyes, and I go to sleep, right? And I even fold my hands. I'm not planning on talking about God. But therefore you shall keep this ordinance at its appointed time from year to year. Now, when the Lord brings you to the land of the Canaanites, He swore to you and your fathers, Abrahamic covenant, and gives it to you, again, Abrahamic covenant, you shall devote to the Lord. So this is what you're to do in the land. So you're not going to do this while you're wandering. In fact, they didn't even have seders while they were wandering in the wilderness. The first seder occurs in the land. So these things happen in the land. So this is preparation for when you're in the land. Here's how it's going to work. You shall devote to the Lord the first offspring of every womb, the consecration of firstborn males. And the first offspring of every beast that you own, the males, belong to the Lord. As soon as you arrive in the land, but every first offspring of a donkey, unclean animal, you shall redeem with a clean animal, a lamb. But if you don't want to redeem it with a lamb, in fact, if you don't want to redeem your donkey, which most people want to keep their donkey and they will give a clean animal for a sacrifice, because a donkey can't be sacrificed, it's unclean. So if you don't want to redeem the donkey with a lamb, well then, okay, you can't sacrifice it, you can only break its neck. Boom. Break its neck, and every firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. What is redeem? Redeem is to obtain release by a means of payment. God allowed for an exchange of the firstborn of an unclean, non-kosher, domesticated animal, the donkey, with the offspring of a clean, kosher animal, example, a lamb. And that is a handy law, because the value of a donkey in an agricultural society is generally greater than that of a lamb. If, however, for some reason you didn't want to substitute the clean kosher animal for the unclean non-kosher animal, the lamb for the firstborn donkey, then the unclean non-kosher firstborn animal's neck is to be broken so that no one can derive value from it. So remember, redeem is a transfer of property. It is a transfer of value. Nobody can now redeem the value from the donkey. It belongs to the Lord, so you have to break its neck. There's no such, however, speaking of breaking necks, no allowable substitutions for the firstborn son. You can't break your firstborn son's neck. Even when they're older. You can't, no way, God forbid, right? Firstborn sons were redeemed, and we find out about this in Numbers. They're redeemed by the price of 5 shekels, 5 silver shekels by their fathers. They redeem their sons. The process, those of you who were in my Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Jews, Judaism and Jewishness, you already know that this ceremony done on the 31st day of the firstborn son's life is called the Pinyan Haben, the redemption of the firstborn. This occurred to me. I was the firstborn of my mother's womb, the only born, firstborn. And so my parents, and we have pictures of this, took me on my 31st day of life to the rabbi, and they symbolically redeemed me with 5 silver coins. The idea is you belong, if you're a firstborn son, you belong to the Lord. You are in the service of the Lord unless there is a transfer of property, a redemption of the firstborn. And so the religious leadership receives something of value in lieu of the child himself. Now, of course, way back then, my parents had no idea that I was going to go into full-time ministry, in which case they would have asked for an immediate refund because they got ripped off. But nonetheless, the Pinyan have been a very important and again, here's the Numbers passage. And to the redemption price, from a month old you shall redeem them by your valuation, 5 shekels in silver, according to the shekel of sanctuary, which is 20 gerahs. I think it was probably 5 Eisenhower dollars. That's, I think, what I redeemed my firstborn, so we gave it to my pastor. We did a redemption ceremony. You know, that was 21 years ago. And it shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this? Now, that's not the baby who's going to be the 30-day-old baby. What is this? No. Why did you do this? When he looks through your photo albums and you show him, this is the opinion of that. I'm sure I asked this. What is this? Then you shall say to him, with a powerful hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. I'm sure most Jewish kids, firstborn, when they see this picture and they say, what was this all about? The answer is, it's what Jews do. It's a Jewish tradition. Why? I don't know. But the Bible tells you this is the answer you to give. With a powerful hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. So the liberation from bondage is indeed the basis for the laws of the redemption of the firstborn. We belong to God. All of us, whether we're Jewish or non-Jewish, we belong to God. We have been redeemed. Right? So when you think of your redemption, which I hope is often, you reflect on your redemption. You discuss it. You share it. It's part of the fabric and the warp and woof of your life cycle. You look back to the event on the day that you gave your life to the Messiah, because remember, when you gave your life to the Messiah, he far, far back in history first gave his life for you. You gave your life to him, but he gave his life for you. So you have been redeemed as well, and you should discuss it. And it came about when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that the Lord killed. Tell the story. How did you get saved? Right? Well, tell this Israel story. This is a great story of redemption. When Pharaoh was stubborn, when he had strengthened his backbone, stiffened his backbone about letting us go, stiffened his spine, that the Lord killed every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beasts. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord the males, the firstborn of every womb, but every firstborn of my sons I redeem. You know, the pagans in Canaan, they believed in the redemption of the firstborn as well. Did you know that? Do you know how they did it? They didn't do it 5 silver shekels. Child sacrifice. Redemption of the firstborn. That was a big idea circulating through the world at that time, through that region, right? But how you exercise that redemption tells the whole story. You know, Jewish people are never sacrificing a child. It's repugnant. It's one of the reasons that the Canaanites are removed from the land. God has a case against them for their sin. The repugnance of this practice leads him to vomit them out of the land by means of the incoming Hebrews. So it shall serve as a sign on your hand, as phylacteries on your forehead, for with a powerful hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. Let's just spend a moment teasing next week, right? Because I hate to just leave you with a little legal section. It's nice to actually get into the narrative. So let's get, and that way I can leave you in what? Suspense. Now when Pharaoh had let the people go, back to the narrative, right? We've jumped back to the narrative. When Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, even though it was near. For God said the people might change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. God knew that the Jewish people, the newly liberated slaves, had a very fragile psychology, very fragile psyches. And if Moses led them the most direct way, up north, that, even though it was the simplest way, that it was inhabited by Philistines, it was guarded by Egyptian fortresses, difficult. The people might change their minds when they see any battle. They're not ready for battle yet, and return to Egypt. They might do a U-turn. So he doesn't take them through the most direct route along the Mediterranean Sea. So the Lord has Moses navigate them along a somewhat longer route. Hence, God led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea, and the sons of Israel went up in martial array. Remember, the hosts of the Lord from the land of Egypt. Now, there is a big, let's get rid of this today so that we don't have to deal with it next week when we're an exciting story of the Red Sea. Technically speaking, it should be translated Reed Sea, and so the exact location of this body of water is impossible to obtain from this text. I think there's little reason. I'll show you the map in a second. But Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had made the sons of Israel, Joseph, had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely take care of you. You will carry my bones from here with you. Again, why? Because Joseph was very well aware of the Abrahamic covenant. He knew that the time of the Hebrews, even though he himself had invited them, the time of the Hebrews in Egypt was short, 4 centuries in duration, and that they would return in 4 centuries. They would return to the land. And Joseph did not want to be left under some pyramid, right? He did not want to be left in some Egyptian tomb. He wanted to be taken back. His body, his sarcophagus, is carried by the Israelites through the wilderness wanderings, and he winds up being buried near Shechem. When they set out from Sukkot, camped in Etam on the edge of the wilderness, the Lord was going before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them on the way, and a pillar of fire by night to give them light. There is visible evidence of the Lord every moment of every day. So they could travel. Fantastic. What do you do when you want to make time at night and you've got no headlights? The Lord himself provides illumination. A pillar of fire by night. That pillar of fire becomes a pillar of cloud by day. So either way, they're able to see the Lord leading them in the direction that they want them to go. The Lord is traveling with them and going before them. How reassuring that was. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. Again, fragile psyches. Let's see a visible totem, a visible reminder of God's presence in our midst, leading us. We are led ultimately not just by Moses, we are led by God himself, who has shown up. And this is the This is the area, Goshen, where this whole thing is Egypt right here. This is the land of the Hebrews, Goshen. And the question is, where is this crossing of the Red Sea? Right? If we think about the map, this is down here. This is the Gulf of Suez. This is where most people have historically thought that the crossing was. Until we get to some linguistic problems with the Sea of Reeds and say, well, this is not really a reedy area here. This is the big dramatic place where you'd think it would be. But if we want to look for reeds, we want to look for fresh water. We want to look for lakes. And so some would say, okay, it's this lake over here. Some would say it's this big lake up here, and they make their way down. And some would say it's this little baby lake over there that they cross. But you have to remember that when you're talking about the miracle of Red Sea, it is not a miracle for the Jewish people to cross through 2 or 3 feet of water. That 2 or 3 feet of water parted is not the issue, because then the bigger miracle is, how does the Egyptian army drown in 2 or 3 feet in a little tiny lake, right? So you need a large body of water. So here's a better picture. This is the Gulf of Suez here. Again, this is what's called the Great Bitter Lake. Some people think it's here. Some people think it's up here. Again, this little baby tiny lake. I have no problem, textually speaking, with the crossing occurring here at the top of the Gulf of Suez, because they just didn't go across. They came down like they were here, and they came down like that. I have no problem. Here's an even better picture of the Jewish people. Now, they wind up here at Sinai at some point, unless, of course, they continue to wander over here. But this, nonetheless, is, I think, your best guess, not down here, but up here, is your best guess of where the parting of the Red Sea. But it doesn't matter, because you know what? It doesn't give us geographic coordinates, but it does tell us it happened. And I am certain that it happened, because if it didn't happen, then how do we explain that Pharaoh's army didn't destroy them, wipe them out, or bring them right back into slavery, right? So the Lord spoke to Moses saying, what did he say? I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you in suspense. We will cross the Red Sea, however, next week. But what I want you to do is not cross the Red Sea. I want you to cross over from talking about, theoretically, the abstraction of sanctification and consecration and redemption to living your life out. And that is a broad gulf. That is a sea to cross. Take your first steps today between what you know to be true and what you express to be true. If more of us, on a daily basis, not just on Saturday morning or on Sunday morning, if more of us on a daily basis expressed and articulated that which we really believe and those truths that we really hold dear, we might change hearts and minds one at a time. You want to hide your light under a bushel? No. Let it shine.